Welcome back. Did you find things in our last study a little interesting? Maybe it did for you what it did for me. It set me free. You see, I spent most of my life trying to do things right. I tried so hard to be perfect, but all I ever seemed to experience was disappointment and condemnation. I was looking in the wrong place for a perfection that the law will be happy with. In the last study, I promised to tell you what the law really wants from us. I will do that in a moment. But first, I would like to ask you if you have ever heard the phrase righteousness by faith. Have you ever wondered what that means? I don't like to use the typical Christian cliches in my presentations because I have found that often we don't even know what they mean, but it's like we think that as long as we can recite these wonderful phrases, we will be fine. So I try to avoid them. But I am going to use this phrase, righteousness by faith, because it's actually a very simple summary of what we are studying. And so let's keep even righteousness by faith, the words, very simple. Let's read a definition of righteousness from Christ's Object Lessons, page 312. Here Ellen White defines righteousness. She says, righteousness is right doing. Now that's what righteousness is. We don't need all the theological arguments to explain it. For the sake of keeping things simple, let's consider righteousness as simply right doing. Because this is what we need, isn't it? Right doing, as in a right doing which is acceptable to the law of God. Because as we have just learned, my right doing is not good enough. But let's read the rest of that statement anyway. Christ Object Lessons, page 312. Righteousness is right doing, and it is by their deeds that all will be judged. Our characters are revealed by what we do. The works show whether the faith is genuine. And so, if righteousness is right doing, let's think of righteousness by faith as right doing by faith. If we think of it like this, it will actually make a lot of sense. Come to Romans chapter 14, verse 23, and let's read the last part. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Whatever works we do that are not the result of faith is sin. It is by faith that right works that are acceptable, come into our life. And so it is right doing by faith. If our works are unacceptable, then what must faith do? It must bring someone else's works into our life. And whose do you think that is? Check out this verse here in Isaiah chapter 54, verse 17. Reading just the last part. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord. Their what? Their right doing is of me, God says. God here is saying that He will provide us with His own right works. He knows that our works are not good enough. And so he says, I will do the works for you. Are his works good enough? In the 9th chapter of Daniel, in verse 14, Daniel says here in his prayer, the Lord our God is righteous in all his works which he doeth. Absolutely. His works are good enough. Everything that God does is righteous. It is all right doing. In fact, he is the definition of righteousness. And the law is a definition of him. And so then, what is it that the law really wants from us? I want to share with you a statement from Alonzo Jones, again from the 1893 General Conference Bulletins, page 412. And Jones is here speaking about of when the law comes to an individual asking for a perfect life, a life filled with right works. Well, says one, I have not got it, but I have done my best. But the law will say, that is not what I want. I don't want your best. I want perfection. It is not your doing I want anyhow. It is God's I want. It is not your righteousness I am after. I want God's righteousness from you. It is not your doing I want. I want God's doing in your life. This is what the law says to every man. You see? This is what the law wants. It does not want my obedience. It wants God's obedience in my life. And so we can stop looking to our own selves to try and try and try to be obedient, and instead start looking to God and asking Him to do the works for us. Read this verse here in Psalm 127 verse 1. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. If it is not the Lord doing the works, it is vanity. Remember what we read last time in Isaiah chapter 64 verse 6? That all of our right doings is like that filthy rag which symbolizes vanity and unprofitability. I recently discovered a beautiful text in the book of Job. Here, in his words, he describes beautifully what it is that we are studying just now. In Job chapter 23, verse 14, the first part, he says, for he, God, performeth the thing that is appointed for me. In this text, the word appointed comes from the Hebrew word kok, and it means prescribed task or action, especially in reference to the law. And so in just a few words, Job is summarizing exactly what we are studying. That God Himself will perform in our lives the very things that His law requires from us. These truths are so precious to me. I'm especially grateful to God for that quotation from Alonzo Jones that just spelled it out for me. The law does not want my obedience. When we discover that, we no longer need to depend on ourselves. It brings relief. Year after year, we try to work things out ourselves, but all we seem to do is get further away from where we want to be. And how stressful is that? Especially when you can see how little time we have left to get ready for Jesus' second coming. But if God is the one doing the works, then what is there for me to worry about? Absolutely nothing. Another beautiful verse here in Isaiah chapter 26, verse 12. Lord, thou wilt ordain peace for us, for thou also hast wrought all our works in us. How many works? All our works. And this is God's gift of peace to us. He doesn't want us stressing and worrying about anything, not even our salvation. Because if we will just let go and let Him do the works, then we have everything that we need for today, everything we need for the time of trouble tomorrow, and we have a perfect obedience in this time of judgment that the Lord is very happy with. One thing I love about this reality is this. There are many things in our lives that need to change. And many times we worry about what our family or our friends might think when they see us changing our diet or the way we dress or anything else that God wants to do in our lives. But if it is God doing the works and anyone has a problem with it, we don't have to take it personally. I didn't do it. If they have a problem, they can go and talk with God about it, because He was the one who did it, not me. If God does the works, the consequences are for Him to deal with. They're not for me. Not for me to worry about or stress about. It's His work, not mine. And so there literally is nothing for us to worry about when God does the works. Nothing. Did the Apostle Paul ever stress about anything? He was even shipwrecked in a storm. Yet, he had perfect peace through all of his experiences. Why? Colossians chapter 1, verse 29, he tells us his secret. Whereunto I also labor, striving according to His, God's, working, which worketh in me mightily. Apostle Paul never stressed about anything because it was God doing the works in his life. He simply said, Lord, you do it, because I can't. And God said, I would love to. Sometimes I wonder how many times God has had to watch me make a mess of my life. And He's been standing there wanting to do the works for me, and I say, nah, I can do it. And so I go and make a mess of it. And then He says, I will clean it up for you. And I say, nah, I can do it. I made the mess, and so I will clean it up. How much have I grieved the heart of God? If only I had let go and let Him do it for me. How much easier life would have been. Not just for me, but those around me also. There are very well known scriptures here in Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13. Let's read them. Wherefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God which worketh in you, both to will and to do of his good pleasure. We read verse 12 and we think, look, I need to work out my salvation. And so we try to. And is it not with fear and trembling, constantly trying, constantly failing, constantly under the fear of condemnation? But we forget verse 13. It is God which works in us both to will and to do of his good pleasure. The fear and trembling that it is talking about in verse 12 is the fear that we will be doing our own works. When we awake in the morning, our very first prayer should be, Lord, don't let me do my own works today. Please, can you do it? And this needs to be our heart's prayer constantly through the day, moment by moment. Whatever needs to be done that day, putting on our socks, brushing our teeth, or meeting some huge trial in the workplace. And especially battling this war against sin. You do it, Lord. I can't. And God loves to do for us the things that we cannot do for ourselves. He does not want us stressing about anything today or worrying about anything tomorrow. He wants us to have peace, even in the time of trouble that is ahead of us. And so he is offering us his own works as a gift. Moment by moment, let go of our own selves and let him do the works. Righteousness by faith is simple. It is right doing by faith. Only God's works, not my works, are acceptable to the law of God. And so faith must bring into our practical reality the perfect right doing of God. In our next study, I want to illustrate these things in a very powerful way. I will show you that after thousands of years, we still have not learned from the mistake that the Israelites made in the wilderness. In fact, we will see that we have not even learned from the mistake that Satan made when he was in heaven. Continue with me on our journey of discovery. I will see you next time.